most of us have had the experience of working on a project that, at the beginning of the project, everybody sits down and creates, some type of timeline. How long do we expect this thing to take?
Right.
And at that point, the plan seems very reasonable, right? Everybody sits down and, tries to figure out what are all the things that need to be done and, what order and how long are they going to take and all of these things. And then, a week before it's supposed to be due the first time, it's probably not close to being done.
Right.
And this is an idea called the planning fallacy. And that it relates to, when we're planning something, particularly a project, something complex, something that takes a lot of parts, we tend as human beings, almost universally, to underestimate the time that it will actually take to do something.
So maybe we should let contractors off the hook instead of just saying construction always runs late. Maybe it's because
somewhat.
of this.
Yeah, contractors are building a house is a great example.
Yeah.
And
because it's never on schedule.
No, never on schedule. And just like most projects that human beings undertake, we're almost never on schedule. And there's a reason for that, and it has to do with our ability to predict things. We're not prescient. We can't see the future. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. We may have some idea of what's involved and how long some of those steps might take if we've had experience with it in the past. But there's kind of a couple factors. One is how long each individual step is going to take, and then also how one step is going to flow into the other.
Yeah.
And the more of these things, so you're making a lot of little predictions, right?
Yeah.
And the more little predictions and the more complicated the interactions between the predictions are, the more of a chance that something takes way longer than expected, or something unexpected happens that takes a long time. And the entire project ends up taking longer than you expected. I mean, a good example is, and this was about a year ago, I had a project for some programming. I had some things I wanted to put on the Personal MBA website that I was actually working with my assistant, Samina, on. And she's really great. We figured out, I taught her how to do everything that needed to be done. She's very diligent and very hardworking. And so she starts on the project, and I expected, okay, this would probably be about a week's worth of work. And then what happened was Samina got sick. And she was out for a week. So she was actually really good, and it probably would have taken a week, except for this unforeseen circumstance that impacted the entire project, and it ended up taking about 2 weeks, versus the one we anticipated.
Because you never planned for that.
Yeah, exactly. And, sometimes when you're planning a project, it's very common to include, what's sometimes called slack time.
Like wiggle room.
Yeah, wiggle room, or, a period of time where it's like, okay, if some things take, longer than expected, we have a little bit of buffer time to work with. The thing is, particularly when you're creating a plan, like if you're working in a company or you're creating a plan for something else, particularly long projects, it's not typically cool to include weeks,
3 months of
or
buffer
months
time.
or years of slack time, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a really
Years?
Sometimes. I mean, there's a really example of a project gone horribly wrong, which was the development of a game called Duke Nukem Forever.
Oh, this is
which is a great
story.
We're gonna have to link to this because it's an amazing story of a project gone disastrously wrong.
So many mental models in this thing.
And they assumed that, Duke Nukem 3D came out, it was a huge success, groundbreaking game, and they're expecting that, this next game to come after it would take, a year?
Right.
And for very many reasons, it would still take, 10 years, 12 years? And then they finally canceled the project. But, all of these things started happening, and then a new game engine would come out, and they want it to be the latest and greatest game, so they'd scrap everything that they were doing and build it on this game. And then finally, they just ran out of money. And the reason it took so long is because the original games made so much money that they had a lot of money to burn through.
Bad.
But then after a while, they just ran out, and the project closed.
Story. Yeah.
But it's a perfect example of the planning fallacy. that, we tend to underestimate the completion time of specific tasks, but we also tend to underestimate the likelihood and discount the impact of things we don't foresee.
Yeah.
So, your lead game developer getting mononucleosis and being homesick for a month.
Bad news.
Okay. Impact to the project, but nobody includes in their critical path schedule, lead developer gets mono for 1 month. And is out,
definitely
right?
not.
This stuff happens all the time. And as we'll talk about in systems, about prediction and how to compensate or how to at least prepare as much as you can for this stuff. But it's a reason why all plans uniformly that are created by people who have limited ability to predict the future are really uniformly horrible. And it's kind of sad. And a lot of times, particularly in larger companies where there's this emphasis on, get this project out, we need to be predictable, we need to do all of these things, there's a huge emphasis placed on, create the plan, work the plan, stick to the plan.
Well, and delivering by the quarterly.
And deliver by the deadline. And, a lot of times in those instances, people suffer because then they have to do, it's the example of overwork or, overburden that we talked about in value delivery. It's like people work too much. The other thing too, and this happens a lot, very common on like computer programming projects or, but sometimes in contracting or things like this, project is running late. And so it's like, okay, well, we're going to put 20 more developers on this.
Oh.
Okay? And then what happens? Your communication overhead skyrockets.
Yeah. And then it goes slower.
It actually makes the project later than it otherwise could be. Because then you have to bring people up to speed, and you have to get them all on the same page, and then you have more communication to deal with, and it's just a downward spiral.
So what positively do we glean from this? Just know that plans are malleable?
Yes.
Okay.
Every plan is malleable. There is a wonderful quote by Douglas Hofstadter, who's actually a programmer and a scientist in ours. He calls it Hofstadter's Law.
Okay.
It says that it always takes longer than you expect, even when you take into account Hofstadter's Law. And it's very true. I mean, a lot of the stuff, particularly if you've never done something before, you're doing something new.
Yeah.
Plans are good because they allow you to simulate how you're going to do something.
Okay.
But the plans themselves are probably horribly inaccurate, and you're just using it as an in-process guide to get you going in the right direction.
It doesn't mean don't plan.
Doesn't mean don't plan. I mean, I think there's another, like a Dwight D. Eisenhower quote that is, plans are useless, but planning is indispensable.
That's right.
It's the process of planning that's important, not the actual,
paper,
CPS Gantt chart thing. I mean, that's next to worthless. It's the process of planning that's actually useful.
Cool.
And, this also, planning fallacy tends to stack with absence blindness and excessive self-regard tendency. It's like, if you've never done anything before, this thing before, you don't have much experience, you can't make good mental simulations, you can't see what's missing.
Because you don't know what you're doing.
Because you don't know what you're doing. And so by the time you figure out that something's missing, then that impacts your plan and everything goes.
So the point is just be patient with yourself?
Yes, be patient with yourself. And then, also excessive self-regard tendency is we tend to highly rate ourselves on things that we have zero experience with, that we've never done before.
Yeah.
And so build some time in for that.
Okay.
Make it very clear that, if you've never done something before, assume that your schedule is not quite right.
Okay.
And, for example, making hard deadlines and doing, making all these commitments and all of these things, if you've never done it before, is probably not a good idea.
Okay, I see.
So plans are good. Use it as a process. But the plan in and of itself, be patient with yourself. Because you're probably wrong. And as long as you plan to be wrong and it's okay, and you can adjust as you go, then the planning fallacy is something that, is not fun, but you can deal with constructively instead of, creating a plan that you must stick to and then
killing yourself trying to do it.
Killing yourself trying to do it.